Ernest Hemingway defined courage as grace under pressure. And if you're looking for someone to personify that quality of grace under pressure, then look no further than this week's guest. John McMahon rose through the ranks of Sony Pictures to become managing director of the studio's EMEA TV operations, a multi-million-dollar business that encompassed content sales, channels and production. He then pivoted to lead the Sony Home Entertainment business in the same region, and later helped establish the international TV operations of Legendary Entertainment. Throughout that time, he has always retained a calm, considered, self-effacing charm that has made him a valued leader, colleague and business partner. When it comes to the business of film and television, John McMahon is the dude, and I'm delighted to have him on the pod. Hi, John. Welcome to the pod.
Thanks, Danny. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I have some knowledge of your early days and background, and nothing too incriminatory by any means. I have always been struck by the fact that I'm sure lots of people in the industry know, that in your early days at college, you were in fact on the Berkeley American football team, which is, pretty impressive. And being on a college football team, it's a little bit like playing professional sport, really, because you play in front of tens of thousands of people. So very exciting. And it led me to one of my philosophical questions that I sometimes start these podcasts off, which is a question to you. If you could swap all of your studio executive experience for a Super Bowl winning season in the NFL, would you do it?
No, I wouldn't. I loved my football years, and I probably played, in organized football, probably 8 or 9 years of organized football, starting, I think, when I was 12, and I went up till when I was 20. My third year of college, I actually got hurt, which kind of ended my career. Looking back on it, I probably went through a number of concussions along the way. And I think my body is much better off for having stepped out of the sport and gotten into the much calmer studio executive lifestyle.
Depending on who you are facing on the other side of the table, of course. Or even sometimes on your side of the table.
You're still butting heads with people, but it's less damaging to your body.
So you left college and then went into the law, and ultimately found yourself in the film studio business. How did you make that transition? How did you make the move from college through to law through to being at a studio?
I worked for a couple of years with a group called the National Association of Securities Dealers, which was regulating the over-the-counter stock market. And I kind of thought I wanted to spend a few years working and then probably go back to school, and most likely to law school. So after a few years of working after college, I applied to school, and I actually went back and got a joint degree, a law degree and an MBA. So I went through law school and ended up coming out and got a job with a big firm in Los Angeles, and was doing kind of what I wanted to do. I was doing securities work. I was doing some venture capital work, some mergers and acquisitions work. And I was 4 years in, and I thought, well, I'm at that point where either I'm going for this and seeing if I can become partner, or, maybe it's time to move on. So I started to look around to see what I could do in the securities industry. But at the time, the industry just was kind of post the 87 crash. They weren't looking to hire people. So then I was kind of faced with, well, what should I do? And I was looking around, and Sony had just bought Columbia Pictures. They just hired Peter Guber and John Peters, and they were off and running, and they were moving their headquarters from New York to Los Angeles. And I saw an ad that they were looking for in-house lawyers, corporate lawyers. So I thought, well, maybe I'll try that, and in LA, it's the entertainment capital. I sent my resume in and got a call back and went in and had a chat with them, and it kind of progressed from there.
The Guber and Peters period is famous, if not infamous. What was it like being at Columbia Pictures then, in a time of enormous change?
It was frankly a lot of fun, because at some level it was, a little bit of a small company in a big, huge studio. There were moments where I kind of felt is this the right move? Things were going very well at the law firm. And, within my first year of being there, probably within maybe 8 months of being there, I found myself spending 4 days and most of 4 nights in a negotiation where company was buying John Peters out of his contract because Tokyo had made the decision that he needs to move on. And the mandate was do this fast. And John Peters hired two of the best entertainment lawyers in LA to represent him. And I was kind of brought in as a junior lawyer to document it. And I was helping write the termination contract, but it was one of those moments where you're sitting there going through this negotiation of all these different arguments and things of what they're asking for. And John Peters had the leverage to kind of ask for whatever he wanted. And Sony just was moving on and wanted to get him out. So I thought, wow, this is an introduction to the entertainment industry.
Sure. Well, some of that is covered in the book Hit and Run, of course. So
Hit and Run, exactly.
I haven't seen your name in the index, but I'll take another look.
And then shortly after that, I had another one of those moments of kind of, did I make the right move? Because I got called up by somebody in management who actually needed some help in buying some extra floor seats for the Lakers games that were coming up for sale right next to the ones that the studio already had control of. I ended up, okay, so you want me to document a deal on trying to buy these other floor seats? And it was, again, one of these moments of, is this what I signed up for when I went over and left the law firm? But hey, it was a great education.
And then ultimately, you must have ended up in international television.
TV had been mostly a distribution business, but we were just starting to look at getting into production internationally and also looking at some channel investments. So I started spending most of my time, virtually all my time, working with the international TV division, which at the time was led by Nick Bingham, and Michael Grindon was Nick's number two. And Michael was in Los Angeles, Nick was in London. So I started working very closely with Michael, especially on some of these production ventures we were doing, some of the channel investments we were making at the time, and also on distribution. So after a couple of years, Nick was going to move over to more of a corporate role with the company. So he was kind of going into a corporate development role with the company in Europe to look at the European investments, but also he was going to be running the European international television business too. And Michael stepped up to head up the division. Basically, he was looking somebody to kind of backfill some of his responsibilities. So he asked me if I wanted to come over and join the television division, mainly doing kind of sales, helping the sales group with their sales planning and looking at kind of how they were structuring some of their deals and trying to bring some consistency to how we were approaching the business internationally. So that was probably in 95, I would say.
And not long after that, you were asked to come to London.
I was, exactly. So Nick Bingham had decided to leave the company. And so we needed to find somebody to run the European business. They asked me if I would go over and kind of on an interim basis, start managing the business and kind of keep it steady until we could find somebody to step into that role. So that was in late 97 and packed up. My wife and I moved over. We had 2 young kids, but we thought, well, let's do this. It's an interim basis. It's for 2 years. Why not? And went over and started doing it. And after about a year of managing the business and not a whole lot of luck in finding somebody to actually run it from there on a go-forward basis, I was asked if I would be willing to stay and just start, become managing director for the EMEA business.
Was it hard to settle in or was it easy?
It ended up being kind of easy because it was such a dramatic change from our lifestyle in Los Angeles to go over to London from the standpoint of, we were living in central London in much tighter quarters than what we moved from in Los Angeles. It was, 180 degrees on the weather. I never realized how much we took the sun for granted until we moved over there. But it was a kick. it was a lot of fun. And I think one of my reservations on, how is this going to work was really around how the family was going to adapt. My wife, prior to our move, was working as general counsel at a company in Los Angeles. So she had to leave her job to make the move. And the kids were young, and we knew they could adapt, but you're just not sure how the family will move. And frankly, within really 3 months of being over there, it's like, why did we worry so much? This is the total kick. And we really loved it. And 2 years turned into 20 years. So
easily done. You mentioned the international TV production business, and that was something that Sony was, I think, very much in the vanguard of. What did that involve? What was the impetus, and what were the results of that move into international production so early?
The impetus at the time was that as one of a number of studios that are looking to sell their US content internationally, you're just out there, trying to produce the best content, trying to structure the best deals to get that content sold into different marketplaces. And there was really a recognition that maybe there are some ways that we could be working with our clients differently, get to know them in a different manner than just going in and trying to sell this US content. And that doing some local productions might be the way to do that, because then you're going to understand better just what is the type of content that they're looking for and how they're trying to fill their day parts on their schedules. And maybe that can help with us in terms of also viewing what we're producing out of the US. So it started with just little format deals, to be honest, where, a kind of, one of the earliest format deals that I can remember was the Who's the Boss with, I think, Carlton in the UK, which became the upper hand. We kind of started the business putting the toe in the water with some other type of format deals. So there was, a Who's the Boss version in Germany that was done. There was a Married with Children version in Germany that was done. But then as kind of, we did that, and we hired some people locally to start running these productions in these different territories, we recognized that, we could get in there and actually start doing some original content. And, we ended up, building an operation in Germany that was run by Christiana Roof that, became really, built the sitcom business in Germany. Which hadn't, prior to us getting in there and doing some original content, sitcoms just hadn't played very well in Germany. They just struggled with it. But we, took some US writers over there and pairing them up with some German writers, and they really developed some great shows. So, I think the business started to really evolve into looking at what we could do with, finding interesting, we have our own library of shows and formats that we could use and try and leverage off of that, but also looking at what are some other ones that we could acquire that might work well in a particular market by doing an adaptation of it. But then also more and more focused on, okay, what original stuff can we do and how we do it. And then that became kind of looking at what other talent can we find in these regions, acquiring companies and starting to really build the business, which we could then take some of the content that we were producing in a particular market and sell it into other markets, because we have this distribution operation that can take content from wherever and move that around.
When I first joined the team, I remember that shortly afterwards, you were away a lot, and it was not negotiating someone's multi-billion-dollar exit package, but in Germany. And the whole process of what happened with Kirch Media seemed to have been a bit of a landmark in what you were doing. And it'd be fascinating to know a bit more about what actually happened and how much of a challenge that was.
We were one of the studios that struck a pretty significant output deal with them, but they ended up kind of just overextending themselves and getting caught in a little bit of a squeeze because just on cash flow. And the bank started having some hesitancy in lending more money. At the time, we were actually in very extensive renegotiations on our contract. And that actually basically struck a a deal that was contingent upon a few things happening before the new deal would go into place, but would give them some relief, but extend the period of time in which we'd be licensing content with them. And unfortunately, before they could tick the boxes on the contingencies we had in our deal, they ended up into bankruptcy. So really what happened was I ended up getting picked to be on the creditors committee for the bankruptcy, which was a fascinating process. Just in looking at everything, how the Kirch Group had just had their little pieces and big pieces of all sorts of different industries, Formula One and rights to this and that, and then this extensive library and an incredibly extensive, actual film collection that they kept in a warehouse and a number of warehouses. And so I was down there at first at a lot of creditors committee meetings, also trying to renegotiate or kind of negotiate, well, what is our position now that they're in bankruptcy? What does that mean for our deal? Again, it was kind of one of these situations where I'd find myself down there every month at a creditors committee meeting or having some negotiations on our deal. And a lot of this happening in German, which I don't speak German. I didn't speak German. And so having to get translators to help along the process. And then we were interested in potentially bidding for some of the assets from the bankruptcy estate. And so we started looking at potentially bidding for the broadcast assets. Ultimately, Saban Group bought the broadcast assets and did very well with them. But we were, seriously looking and pitching to Tokyo that maybe this could be a very good investment. And as it turned out for Saban Group, it was a very good investment.
Do you think Sony will keep the studio in the medium to long term?
I think there's a big question just on kind of what's going on with studios. I kind of thought and kind of hoped there would be, when I was there, that there would be more of a integration of different aspects of the Sony business together. I mean, especially when you look at the entertainment assets of the pictures, music, and PlayStation, and whether those different divisions should be coming together in a more uniform way. And they always encouraged a lot of conversation to happen between the divisions. I often had meetings with PlayStation, with music, to talk about ventures that we could do together or how to do it. But at the end of the day, each division was ultimately judged by their own performance, not kind of how we may have helped build this other part over here. As with many large companies, that it often breaks down when everyone is held to kind of your own results, not necessarily the better results for the whole group. I don't see any reason that they'll turn around and sell it. I would have kind of thought that a number of years ago, that it was maybe time for them to move on, but they've hung in there. I can't understand strategically where it fits in anymore.
Can you survive in this business as an independent studio without a streaming service? Can you still make films? Can you still get them out there? Can you still
I think absolutely can. What may be shifting, though, is that, again, historically, you went out there and produced this content, you controlled the distribution, and ultimately, as it made its way through the different means of exploitation, it went into your library, and you had this library of content that you still controlled all these rights to, and there was some serious asset value to owning a library. But I think the struggle that independent players have is trying to control some of that downstream revenue, because in order to get the the TV series financed, some of these players are saying, yeah, but I want to buy it out. I want to control it. I'll give you a nice fee and you make a nice profit, but you're a producer for hire. You're taking your margin and you're not building up a long-term library value that maybe help keep the company sustainable, because then as you need future production money, you're leveraging that revenue stream.
So ultimately, you moved from the television side of the business into the home entertainment side of the business. How did you have to change as an executive when you made that transition into that side of the business?
I don't think I would change necessarily as an executive. The time I spent managing the television business, there were significant changes in the industry, significant changes in kind of the direction of where we wanted to take the company, and changing personnel or changing, investments and divesting of investments that we've made, things like that, to evolve with it. And I think that kind of moving over into home entertainment when I did, which was 2009. And, at 2009, the home entertainment business had been in a pretty significant decline for about 3 years at that point. I mean, I think it peaked in 2006, when you look back at kind of how the numbers were. So there was a lot of structural change going on within the division. The European business in particular had just gone through a pretty significant structural change when I joined. They were still in the process of it. So a lot of the skill set that I had developed as an executive with television, and just in terms of kind of building something, well, now had to be slightly redirected to kind of how do you start parsing things apart, and what do you really need to kind of keep a business. But I could step in with, kind of set of fresh eyes to say, hey, why are we doing it this way, or what is this? And at the time, and part of what was asked of me when I made the move over there was looking at kind of what the company was doing on the digital side of the business, and trying to look at how, prior to that point, television was handling a significant part of the digital business for both the subscription and for transactional, and not just transactional VOD, but also even sell-through. And it was, shouldn't some of the sell-through especially be married up with the physical sell-through, so that, you're getting price points that make sense, and you're getting marketing campaigns that make sense. So I was asked to start looking at how to kind of marry things up and start taking a division that had been, very traditionally a physical business, and start evolving that division into thinking more digitally, and how you approach the retail clients that you have as they're trying to evolve their business to make digital offerings of the content. But also just broadly, we need to sync these things up so you're not getting a disconnect between, for the consumers when they're looking at, buying a physical disc or buying it online. On the television side, it was a very future looking business. You had a deal you were negotiating in a market, and you were looking at, okay, how do we do this deal? I mean, it's usually a multi-year deal to offer content as it rolls off from the studio. And so, and as soon as you got the deal done, you're thinking, okay, where am I going to be? And, what are things going to look like in 3 years in that marketplace? And home entertainment is very title by title driven. I mean, you have to put all your effort into this title, this new release is launching, and you got to get there and find out what the retailers want and how much they want it. And then, how do I get and market it, and what co-op advertising I do? And then you get that launched and go, and then you move on to the next one. And you're not necessarily thinking, okay, well, as we started to move to managing and working with television more on the digital side of the business, it did promote much more of a little bit of a longer term thinking of kind of, okay, generally where are we going, and how do we start doing things, and how do we structure deals so that we have the flexibility down the road to do that. And also, so we're not interfering by pricing, by things, and dumping or library product and undercutting price on library product that, frankly, library under home entertainment is pretty new product compared to how television viewed library. It was a fascinating time and a great time, but it had plenty of challenges.
And then, just to finish off the biography, after Sony, you moved to Legendary.
Yes.
And you were then back in a sort of more frontline sales role. How was that to go from a very senior role to being a more active salesperson? Because I guess a lot of the broadcasters that you typically interacted with, you knew the very senior people who ran the whole operation, or even multiple operations across many territories. And then you were now dealing with people who were sort of new, and you might know the very senior people, but ultimately it's not their job to do those deals. So that's a process of reinvention that I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, and it was actually a huge change for me, because when I moved over to Legendary in 2014, so Legendary had started to build a television division, and it brought Bruce Rosenblum in from who had just left Warner to start building it. And actually, Michael Grindon, my Sony boss, had been brought in by Legendary to start building up a distribution business. And part of that was looking at what they could do internationally with a real focus on what could be done in Europe first, since the significant portion of international revenue on TV series comes from there. Legendary's films were controlled by, either Universal or Warner Brothers because of the nature of their overall film deals with them. So it was strictly a focus on new TV shows. We had no library. It was just, here's the shows we're developing and getting produced, and then going out and trying to sell these. And so a lot of my role was first just educating a lot of the broadcast and streaming platforms and everything about who we were, who Legendary was, which people knew from the films that Legendary had produced over the years, but now we're in the television business, so here's what we're trying to do. My experience and contacts were invaluable in helping me get in the door. I would at least get an introduction, get to the right people, and start making the pitches. But also for me, then it was about pitching again. I mean, it was about actually doing the sales pitch. And here's what we got in development. Here's what's being produced right now. Here's when we'll have it. It was actually a fantastic, fun experience for me, because it was going way back to when I had first joined the international TV division, but with a new company with a story to tell, and that was really fun. Legendary was an example of kind of what I was talking about, that as Legendary was looking to develop new TV shows and going out and trying to pitch these shows, and given the nature of the content that Legendary was interested in producing and looking at producing, it was a type of content that lent itself more to a streaming platform. So as a result, they would maybe go in and have a conversation with Netflix or Amazon or whatever about, here's a show we're developing, and is this something that you would be interested in? And they would say, yeah, but we want worldwide rights, or we want these extensive rights. As a distribution operation, we're trying to get in there to, well, carve out this or carve out that. And it became little piecemeal type of things, because you're frankly a small production business, and you don't have the leverage to kind of say to some of these players, no, I need you to do whatever. And the production budgets were such where you really did need the kind of money that the streamers were willing to throw at some of these shows. So it ends up, I had less and less to talk about with people, because yeah, we did develop that show. Yes, we are producing that show, but Amazon, Netflix, whoever is going to have the rights. I may have a window down the road here, but they would say, yeah, call me when you get there. But we were successful with what we could carve out.
So this is the point in the podcast where I ask my guests for their lockdown media, a book, movie, an album, and box set. What would you choose if you had one of those only to get you through a lockdown? Okay,
well, I will say, just to preface my picks ahead of time, I've kind of made some what to me are more of my more comfort type of picks. I found pandemic related and maybe kind of the political environment related that there's just been, I've been, lots of high anxiety in kind of dealing with these times. And just like on the book front, I read a couple of books just recently. I read Lawrence Wright's end of October, his new novel about a pandemic. So living in a pandemic, reading about a pandemic, that was, and then I'm in the midst of reading Bob Woodward's book on Trump, which is like, okay, get the blood pressure up a little bit more. So I picked some comfort ones, Danny. So these are my comfort choices. The first one will kind of surprise you a little bit, because of my book, I'm picking A Good Walk Spoiled, which is John Feinstein's work that he did, the novel he did on the 1994 PGA Tour. And it's a pretty extensive book, 600 pages or so. And but it's also very digestible, where you can kind of go in and out of it, because there's little vignettes of following this particular tournament, this player in this tournament, and what's going on. And the reason I say it's a little surprising for you, Danny, because my golf game, and it's kind of one filled with high anxiety. Okay, but actually reading about it is much more comforting, and reading about these players going through their own high anxiety is actually like, okay, well, so I shouldn't feel that bad that I'm feeling this way when I'm on the tee or when I'm in the putting or whatever. So
I imagine your reading is better than your golf.
Yes, it is. It is. Still a
little
slow.
Mine certainly is.
But I'm working on it, Danny. I'm working on the golf game. Film, I go with a Coen Brothers classic, The Big Lebowski.
Because you were in it.
I wasn't in it, but I do kind of felt like I wanted to model myself off the dude.
You are the dude, John. Come on.
And so that's kind of why I feel. But it's a fun movie. It's kind of like every time you watch it, every time I watch it, it's very comforting, funny, and you see new things every time. So album wise, I'm going with an old classic from one of my favorite groups, Steely Dan, and I'm picking Katie Lied, which was not their most popular album. It was an album that came out kind of, I think, in the mid '70s. I was just getting out, in high school or just getting out of high school, and it was, so it's just again a very kind of comforting album. And I love Steely Dan's sound and their lyrics, or which you can't decipher exactly what they mean, but it was that one. So that's my album. And on box set, okay, a little caveat here: if they made box sets of game shows, Danny, I would choose a box set of game shows. I love game shows, always love game shows. I would pick Press Your Luck, okay, which is a U.S. game show that was done in the mid '80s, and it actually has been rebooted now. So they're doing CBS had done the original version, ABC is doing the new version, which is redid the format, but it's a fun game show with trivia game show, and then you get spins on the wheel and you win money, and then if you hit a whammy, you lose all your money, and you can't, if you hit too many whammies, you're out of the game. But it's a fun show that actually I was a contestant on in the mid '80s, so that's why I'm pretty partial to that game show. And I lasted 3 days, made $20,000 when I was still in law school, and I thought, God, okay, this isn't bad. I maybe I should go in the entertainment business.
I'm going to ask some of my contacts in the game show and formats business to track that tape down. We have people, we listen to this podcast. I'm sure we'll be able to find it.
I'm going to regret that. Okay, but anyway,
you could have been on the dating game or something. I'm sure this.
Yeah, no,
there are people in this industry, I'm sure, have been on Blind Date or the dating game.
No, my real box set would be Friday Night Lights. It's around football, but it's, basically the story of a small town in Texas, and, the dynamics of the high school and the high school football team in Texas, football in Texas, and high school football in Texas in particular is a big sport, big stadiums. I mean, you talk about how colleges, well, some of these high schools have, 25,000 seat stadiums. So, but it's just a sweet story and about a family, and the father's the coach, the mother is a administrator at the high school, and just some great characters. And I've watched that series a couple of times, and it's just really well written. I thought it was one of the better written shows. It wasn't critically successful, but it was critically successful. It wasn't commercially successful. Sorry.
Well, John McMahon, thank you so much for coming on the pod. We started with American football. We've ended with American football. So there's a tremendous amount of synchronicity there. Thanks so much. And good luck in this new dawn that is America post January the 20th, or whenever the inauguration.
Exactly.
The sun is now shining again.
Thank you, Danny.